Welcome back to Daily Dose Weekend Editions. Today we're looking at the accent patterns of 1 Samuel 3:19. This is part 2 of part 2 of chapter 3:19. Let's read the Hebrew together today and then get an overall translation, and then we'll dive into the accents. Let's read this together. Vayigdal Shemuel, Vadonai haya imo, velo hipil mikol devarav, Artsah. So now that we have the reading, let's look at the translation. And then Samuel grew, or in Samuel matured, he grew up, and the Lord existed with him, or we might say, and the Lord was with him. And he did not, this is the Lord, he did not cause to fall from any of his words to the ground. So the idea here is that the Lord did not let any of Samuel's words fall to the ground. Now that we have the translation back under our belt, let's look at the accents. Now remember, the first major break in the sentence is at the end of it with the sof pasuk here. Also, remember that the sof pasuk and the saluk are always paired together, since the saluk must occur on the word immediately preceding the sof pasuk. So basically, these are a tandem here. They're a pair. In fact, the accent bookmark that comes with the BHS lists them together as one accent mark. Notice here, too, that the saluk marks the accented syllable of the word. If you remember the last week's video, we discussed that this word was translated to the ground as an accusative of place, even though it doesn't have the lamed preposition or the el preposition indicating direction. The kametz hey on here is an accusative hey, or a directional hey, and it is an unaccented hey, kametz hey. Unlike the feminine ending, that is an accented kametz hey. Notice here the saluk marks the accent and is moved forward, telling us clearly that this is an accusative kametz hey. The next accent we need to find is the athnach here. Notice how far forward in the verse the athnach is. Since the athnach can appear anywhere in the verse, or in other words, it's not limited to the word immediately preceding the sof pasuk like the saluk is, it can occur anywhere. Since it can fall anywhere, the Masoretes could move it around, forward and backward, in order to highlight important information in the verse. Here, it seems to be highlighting that Samuel matured. This is an important aspect of Samuel's life at this point, I think. He's been groomed for the task of becoming a leader in Israel after Eli, and now, with the announcement of Eli's downfall, the text highlights that Samuel matured and grew up in order to fulfill that task. Now, we have to be careful at how far we push this, quote, exegetical insight from the accents alone, because the accent marks are not inspired scripture. They were added later. I wouldn't make this point a main point in your sermon, but at the least, we can see an emphasis here on Samuel's maturity. For the record, the Septuagint does not use here the same word that Luke uses in Luke 2:52 to refer to Jesus growing in wisdom and stature. So again, you have to be careful at how far we take this imagery of maturing. Either way, though, the accents here mark an emphasis on Samuel's growing up. The next accent in the athnach segment is the near disjunctive subordinate of the athnach, namely the tifka, and we find it here. In such a small segment, the tifka simply marks off the predicate from the explicit subject. So let me put a break in here, and we can then delineate the two main segments of the verse. So now in the first line, the athnach segment, we get, and Samuel grew, or matured, and Samuel grew. Now in the saluk segment, we want to look for the near subordinate disjunctive accent, and again, it's the tifka here. Next, we want to look for the far disjunctive accent, and since the segment is long enough for one, we find the zakef katon here. Now let's stay here in the zakef segment for a moment and find the near subordinate accent there, and it is the pashta. Again, this segment is so short, the zakef segment here is so short that we don't get the far subordinate of the zakef. The pashta here marks off the subject, or the initiator of the nominal clause. Now, I've discovered that I describe nominal clauses differently than others. I call a nominal clause one in which the subject is fronted, When referring to a nominal clause, I'm not necessarily talking about a verbless clause. So here the subject is fronted in order to say something about the subject, to highlight it and tell us what the subject was doing. Here the subject, Adonai, was with him or with Samuel. You might even emphasize it with something like, and Samuel grew up, now the Lord was with him. So you're saying something about the subject, and this is what I call a nominal clause, and it's set off here in the Zakef segment. Next, we will look at the Tifka segment, and the thing I want to point out here is that the Tifka segment doesn't have any other accents, even though it is longer than either of the other segments. Now, what I want to point out here is that accents often mark constituents, not necessarily individual words. So notice that velo hipol right here. Notice that the conjunctive accent falls on hipil, and lo has the metheg. That's not an accent. So these two, quote, words have only one accent because they are one constituent in the verse. Notice next, mikol devariv. In this one, again, look at mikol. Doesn't have an accent on it, even though it is technically two words in the Hebrew, from all. Now, because of the makef joining the words, this is one constituent, and hence only one accent. Here it's the tifka, as we've already marked. So even though the tifka segment is longer in terms of total words, it only has two constituents. One has the disjunctive tifka, and the other one the conjunctive accent on hipil. So in the Saluk segment, we then get the translation here, and the Lord existed with him, or the Lord was with him, and he did not cause to fall from any of his words to the ground. And that's going to do it for this weekend's Dose of Hebrew. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, Shalom.